My name is Bill Bovender. Today is August 31st, 2022, and I'm in Kingsport, Tennessee. And I have the distinct honor to interview my partner, Jimmie Carpenter Miller. This interview is taking place as part of the legal history project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. What is your full name?
Jimmie Alice Carpenter Miller.
Is it okay to ask when you were born?
Sure, I was born in 1957
Where were you born?
in Morristown, Tennessee.
There must be a story behind Jimmie. Would you share it with us?
My mother's side of the family have boy names. My mother's name was Billie Alice. I'm Jimmie Alice. I have an aunt named Mary Frank. So I think it came from my mother's side of the family that Jimmie worked because I'm the second of two girls. My father had a namesake.
Let's talk about your family for just a few minutes. Grandparents.
So my grandparents both resided in Hamlin County. My grandfather on my dad's side owned a sawmill. There were 12 children in that family. Needless to say, my grandmother took care of the children. My mom's father, William Estes, was a farmer, and there were 7 in that family. So big families. I have a lot of cousins.
What about your parents?
My dad was in the military, and
His name?
Jimmie Carpenter, and he was about in the middle of the pack of his siblings, not the oldest, but in the middle. My mother was Billie Alice, as I said, Estes, and she graduated from the old Whitesburg High School that is been closed for many years, but is an elementary school. And she graduated from high school. She worked as a cashier in a grocery store most of her life.
Any siblings?
I have one sister. Lila Yvonne Harold is her name, and she lives in Morristown now. She's a rural mail carrier. She is just slightly 1 year older than me. And growing up, we had nicknames. She was Lulu and I was Sissy. And we, you know, when I go back to Morristown, or when one of the folks here from the office have been in Morristown, they come back and say, hey, so-and-so was asking about Sissy Carpenter. So it you know, still around, that nickname.
Sissy stuck and Jimmie stuck, both.
And Jimmie stuck, yes.
Your spouse.
So my spouse of, I guess in 5 more days, 42 years, is Robert Lynn Miller, Bob Miller. And we met in 1979, and we got married when I was a little more than halfway through law school. And it took.
Where's Bob from?
Bob is from Clinton, Tennessee, Anderson County. And for the first 20 years we lived in Kingsport, he would have moved back to Clinton in a heartbeat, but has come to think about Kingsport as home.
What business or professions were Bob in?
So when we met, he was working for juvenile court. He's not a lawyer. I get asked that a lot. He's not a lawyer, but he was working for juvenile court in Anderson County. And he was working for a law firm, although not a lawyer, when I accepted the position here in Kingsport. So he left his job to come so that we could move here. And he's had a number of jobs. He was with the Boy Scouts in a finance position. He ran the Chamber of Commerce of Kingsport for about a dozen years. He left there and went to work for Governor Sundquist in the Department of Labor. when he came back, he worked at and sold commercial insurance for Kingsport development, and went to work with a lot of the guys that he was friends with, and then was given an opportunity to lead Goodwill of Tennessee and Virginia, Southwest Virginia. So he did that for more than 12 years, and he's been retired 5 years now.
You have children?
We do. We have 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy, and they're all married with spouses and children, and one lives here, and the other 2 are one in Memphis and one in Brooklyn, New York.
Tell us about what they're involved in.
So my middle child is the only, and his name is Benjamin Lynn, named after his father, Robert Lynn. He's the only one that went to law school. My kids, when they were younger, people would ask them, do you want to be a lawyer? And all 3 of them at the time said, no, there's too much homework. And but he went to law school and took a job after his 2nd year. He clerked for the law department for the city of New York. And during his 2nd year of law school, or 2nd summer, and was offered a position, and he took that position, and he's still in that position, and I think he's been there 11, maybe 12 years now. And my oldest daughter, the one that lives here, Rebecca, she went to the University of Tennessee undergraduate, and then she went to pharmacy school at Mercer in Atlanta. She and her husband, she married straight out of undergraduate, a semester early, and she and her husband married. He had gone to law school at Emory, and so they lived in Atlanta for 5 years. She finished her program and did a residency at Emory. And Matthew, her husband, practiced sufficient time so that he could be admitted to the Tennessee bar by reciprocity.
What's his last name?
Spivey. And we're delighted they're here. They have 3 children, twins that are 8, and a younger child that's 6. And so time now is spent in football and baseball, soccer, gymnastics, dance. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun. And then I have my younger daughter, Molly Claire. She lives in Memphis, works for International Paper. She graduated from UT, took a job in Memphis, didn't know anybody, and she's been there, I guess now she's been there 9 years, maybe 10 years. She has a little girl named Lucy, and Lucy's 2, and the 6th grandchild is on the way. I failed to mention my son Ben and his husband have a 14-month-old, Laz, and so we are blessed with children and grandchildren and more to come.
What's the best thing about being a grandmother?
Well, I would say, number one, it's pretty cool to watch your children be parents. It's things change, and but that's a neat thing to see. And as much as I love to be with them, it's pretty good at the end of the visit when they go home. I don't mean that ugly. You get the best of them.
Your son-in-law, Matthew Spivey, his father is Rick Spivey, is that correct?
That's right. I tell everybody, they sometimes refer to him as our outlaws or in-laws, and I said, I certainly would claim Sandy. I would claim Rick, I'm kidding. But anyway, we share grandchildren, and his wife and I were great friends before our children married. They didn't even meet until, I guess, the year she graduated from high school was the year he graduated from college. And so, yeah, and they live here in town, and they're at all the meets and the recitals and the games. So, but anyway, so yes.
Bring up Rick Spivey. What does he do?
So Matthew and his father practice together with one other lawyer, and they are, you know how every small town has one firm that makes a good living doing criminal defense work. Well, that's sort of the Spivey, and it's Spivey, King and Spivey. They have a third partner. But, and I should mention that Sandy Spivey is likewise a lawyer. So on the questionnaire provided, it would say, are there any lawyers in the family? Well, I was the first, but now we have a son-in-law, and my daughter has two in-laws that are lawyers, so no shortage of lawyers.
Did you spend your childhood in Morristown?
So when I was less than a year, my parents moved to South Florida, and we lived there until we actually came back 2 different times to Tennessee, but only for brief periods of time. And so we moved back finally when I started the 7th grade.
Tell us about growing up in Florida.
We didn't live far from the beach. It was, you know, I have fond memories. My husband and I went to a bowl game, and we did sort of a trip down memory lane and went to all the places we used to live. And we lived for a while at the time it was Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy now. But it was good. You know, my sister and I were always close, still are. And I think I'm pleased to live in Tennessee now, but it was a good experience.
You must have gone to more than one elementary school as you're growing up.
So we did. My sister and I attended 6 different elementary schools. I did not attend kindergarten. I'm not exactly sure why that happened, but, you know, I guess somebody could say, well, I mean, they had kindergarten because my sister went to kindergarten, but I don't know, perhaps it was more convenient for me to just start 1st grade, but anyway.
How old were you when you moved back to Morristown?
I guess 13. And so we went to school at the Morristown Public Schools. Attended and graduated from Morristown Hamblin East High School.
What was your first job?
Oh my gosh, Bill. I worked, so I can honestly say this, since I was 16 years old, I've always worked. And I began at sort of a high-end clothing store in Morristown, literally when I turned 16. And I had a lot of jobs. I worked at a jewelry store, and you know, the old-timey jewelry store that sold china and crystal, and I learned to wrap beautiful packages from my experience working in the jewelry store. When I was a senior in high school, I started working for an oral surgeon in Morristown, and I continued to work for him. First, I worked in the front office, and then I sort of moved to the back office. And one summer, his assistant was out, and I followed him to the hospital. And he was a wonderful man, and you know, I credit him, I guess. I am not from a family of college graduates, and I think working with him played a large role in my going forward and getting an education.
I heard a rumor that you and your sister had a little auto accident while you were there in high school in Morristown.
We did. It wasn't a little accident. It was a head-on collision that totaled my car, and I had a little Subaru that I was so proud of. I can remember my mother bought it. It was a straight shift. I didn't know how to drive a straight shift, but she let me. We went one morning before school. It was a 1974, and it cost $2,650. And my sister had a child, and my sister and I and my sister's child lived with our mother. And my mother's sister, who lived on a gravel, narrow road, kept my sister's child. And I got home from school and went to pick up the child, again, this was probably 75, and had a cousin with me, and she was holding my niece, who was, maybe a little over a year old. And gravel road, windy, and we both came around. My sister, not realizing I had picked up my niece, was on her way to pick up the niece before the days of cell phone. And we rounded the curve at the same time in opposite directions, and boom. So it was, we were very fortunate and very lucky that nobody was hurt. The children landed up in the front passenger floorboard. But anyway, the insurance agent was slightly more upset than my mother. But anyway, it all worked out fine.
So you graduated from Morristown East. What was your intention after that, insofar as further schooling was concerned?
Well, I am not ashamed to say that finances in our household was always a concern. My mother was essentially a single parent for most of my life. My parents were married twice and divorced twice, and my father died my senior year of high school, February 1975. So I did want to go to school. Walter State Community College was relatively new. It was in Morristown. Because my father passed away, all of a sudden I received Social Security benefits. And between that and grants, I was able to go to Walter State free. And I'm very grateful for the education I got there. I think it continues to serve the students of, graduates of Hamblin and the surrounding counties of Northeast Tennessee. So I finished there in 2 years. I continued to work for the oral surgeon. I would, mostly try to have morning classes, and then I worked there in the afternoons, and, finished. And I had, the idea that because of the oral surgeon, I would pursue something in the health field. So even at Walter State, I took a number of science courses, and then when I finished at Walter State, I went to the University of Tennessee. Never considered any place else. I would have, Carson Newman, which is a small Baptist college in Jefferson County, would have, I guess, been my preference. But again, with finances an issue, it became, so I applied to Tennessee. I was accepted and started there in the fall of 1977.
So it's safe to say that, at least up to the point you entered UT, that you hadn't reached the conclusion that you're going to be a lawyer.
No. No, I'm not sure I knew. I guess I knew the person that handled my mother's divorces, but no, I didn't know any lawyers and didn't really have exposure to the legal profession.
So when you got to UT, did you continue taking science courses, basically pre-med?
I did. I did. You know, chemistry, anatomy, biology, and, you know, again, it is what it is. You know, second semester of organic chemistry made me believe that perhaps medical school was not in the cards for me. So, and again, this is to admit for everyone to hear, I guess, that as I was finishing my third year of law school, or third year of undergraduate, I thought, I wonder what degree I could obtain with 1 year left of courses. And the curriculum was such that I could obtain a degree in social work. So in the fall of '78, I began taking, it would have been the fall of '78. I graduated in '79. And so I took the courses sufficient to receive a degree in social work. And that was, you know what, turned out to be a great thing. One of the things I had to do was to do an internship. And there were a number of places that were available. It was an unpaid internship. And one was with two lawyers in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Dorothy Stuhlberg and Ann Mostoller. And it was just a wonderful experience. They were both very special women who, they were a little older, you know, than it's not like they were just out of law school. And they both gone to law school a little bit later. Dorothy's claim to fame is she brought the lawsuit that changed girls' high school basketball from half court to full court. And just by way of interest, her expert witness was Pat Head at the time, Pat Head Summit now. So it was a wonderful experience. They made me want to be a lawyer. I saw what they did. They represented, in large part, I mean, they were both involved in civil rights litigation. They spent a lot of time in juvenile court. They were just, you know, they represented the have-nots. And I thought I could do this.
Did you get to go to court
I did.
during that internship?
I did. I don't recall that there were any jury trials in my time with them, but like I said, they both were practiced in juvenile court a fair amount, and so yes, I did get to be in the courtroom and watch them and see, you know, how they treated their colleagues, their adversaries, you know, opponents, and learned a lot that I think, you know, served me well.
One question I wanted to ask, when you were at UT, did you live on campus or?
I did not. Again, I lived with three other friends. Well, one I knew and two we did not know. But we lived in North Knoxville, and you know, even while I was at UT, I continued to be employed. And you know, I feel like certainly my mother and my sister made sacrifices so I could be there. And it was important for me to do well. You know, again, as it worked out, that served me well to do what it took to achieve good grades. And so.
You got the end of your undergraduate career. Had you decided to go to law school at that point?
You know, I really did not decide to go to law school until I would say the November, December timeframe. And I thought, well, I better take the LSAT. So that's when I took the LSAT. I had no idea then that you could take it multiple times, but I took it and did okay. And so I applied at the University of Tennessee College of Law and was accepted, and I began, the week after I graduated from undergraduate.
One other question about the Stuhlberg firm and Dorothy and Ann. What did you learn about the practice of law from them that carried over into your career?
I think I learned, the importance of, and this may seem odd to those who know what my practice primarily has been, but, the importance of using your legal education when you can to help those who can't afford a lawyer. I have no idea how they were compensated, but I know that they had a lot of clients that, seemed to me could not otherwise have afforded a lawyer. And so I think perhaps that's the thing that stayed with me the most, that I learned from Dorothy and Ann. And I think I learned from them, that you could be a lawyer and you could be graceful, if you will, if I can use that word, in your approach to people. And you didn't always have to be the loudest voice in the room. Didn't have to be angry with the other side all the time. And so I credit both of them a lot.
So you get to law school. Any professors in law school stick out in your mind?
Well, I'll give a couple. Forrest Lacey was a professor who very much believed in the Socratic method of teaching. And I think I can honestly say, and so my class was it was the last summer class that started at UT. And at that time, UT was on quarters, not semesters. So we had a summer quarter, a fall quarter, etc. But so I had him for Contracts 1, and I'm pretty sure he never answered a question. He had a pen, and he twirled the pen day after day through the entire hour-and-a-half lecture. But it really wasn't much of a lecture. It was, questions and more questions. So, and then the other person that sticks in my mind is Professor Sobieski. So, you stay with your section through the first 3 quarters, and then it's the 4th quarter that you're allowed to take electives, if you will. And I took evidence, already thinking I was going to be like Dorothy and Ann. And he called on me the first day of class, and then he called on me every single day for 3 weeks, and it became a thing. So that was, that sticks in my mind. I remember those professors where I made the best grades, John Sobieski and Grayford Gray, and, but I had a great law school class. I continue to be friends. I don't see them a lot, but, we don't miss chances. I had my best friend in law school, and so our class was a little bit of a mixed class. There were, I don't know, maybe not quite a third of the class were women. The women, there were not many that were fresh out of school. But my friend Whitney Johns, who as it turned out was from Carter County, Elizabethan, I would call her an atypical Carter Countyan, but we were best friends, and Bob Boston with Waller was in my class, Randy Wilson with Miller Martin. My other study partner was Jean Podesta, who Went to Memphis, was from Memphis and went back to Memphis. So I had a great class.
You ever figure out why Professor Sobieski called on you for 3 weeks?
No, I did not. I don't know if it was, I don't know. I'd be speculating. I speculate that perhaps he felt like I needed to, maybe was quieter than I should have been. Not many people that would accuse me of that over the last 40 years, but I don't know. I don't know. As you can imagine, I was always extremely well prepared for that class. And aside, when the 4th week began, and I guess he determined I'd had enough, I was rarely called on after that.
Would it be fair to say you probably were the first female Jimmie to attend the College of Law?
I guess so. As you can imagine, even now, I receive phone calls that say, I'd like to speak with Mr. Miller. And I explain that I'm Jimmie Miller. And they're like, anyway.
So you went continuously from Walter State, UT undergraduate, UT College of Law. Is that correct?
Yes.
While you were in law school, did you work for any firms other than Stuhlberg and Musteller?
So I clerked and took classes at the same time with Legal Aid of East Tennessee, or it was Legal Aid that was there in Oak Ridge. Neil McBride was there, and it was a great experience as well. I do liken that after my second year at Walter State, that summer, a friend and I worked as summer missionaries, and the clerkship with Legal Aid sort of reminded me a little bit of my summer as a summer missionary. And we didn't go anyplace exotic. It was through the Tennessee Home Mission Board, and we were in Crossville, Tennessee. And we, did vacation Bible schools and so forth. The summer as a summer missionary convinced me that probably I was not headed towards a career as a missionary. Candidly, the summer working with Legal Aid, and it was a neat experience and wonderful people, and they did good work. But candidly, I sort of finished that experience and thought, probably not going to seek a position with Legal Aid when I finished law school.
Now, you met Bob when you were working with
Dorothy and Ann.
All right. And what was Bob doing at that point in time, and how did y'all come to get married?
So, I had dated the same person at Walter State, at UT, and I met Bob. Dorothy, because of her juvenile court work, she was going with the juvenile court judge and the juvenile court officers on a surprise visit to all the juvenile detention facilities in Tennessee. And at the last minute, Dorothy's husband sustained a back injury, and she said, "Why don't you go in my place?" And I thought, okay, sure. And so we went about, to visit those facilities, and it was a learning experience. And the first day there was another woman who was a juvenile officer, a male, and the judge. So we were just 4 of us. But that night, Bob Miller joined us in Nashville for the sort of evening events, and then the next day. And I had seen him at the courthouse, but we had a really good evening, and and next day. And so when I got home that night, I talked to my girlfriends and I said, so, I've been dating this other person all this time, sort of talked about getting married. I said, but I found myself really attracted to this person. And they were very much in my boyfriend's camp and said, you forget that. You're much better off, and I won't say his name. So I waited until they went to bed that night. And I went into the kitchen, and Bob loves to tell this story, but I'm the one that asked him out on a date. And that was, like I say, the late 1979, and then we were married in September of 80.
And did you clerk for any firms in law school?
Yes, and so
Other than the Stuhlberg firm.
The legal aid position, and then the semester before I took off. Most of the people in my class, we could have graduated in August of 81, but almost all of my class took at least 1 quarter off, and then we graduated in December of 81 because we couldn't take the bar until February. So I took that summer and I worked for Arnett, Draper and Haygood in Knoxville. And I primarily worked with Mr. Foster Arnett. He was quite a character. He never spoke to me without beginning the sentence, Miss Jimmie. And but Louis Haygood and Jack Draper, Rick Powers was with the firm. I worked with him some. Dan Ray was a new lawyer there, and I learned a lot. And Foster Arnett, we continued to be friends until he passed away.
Were you the first female to be in that office from a lawyer perspective?
Yes. I mean, I was still a law clerk and not a lawyer, but yes, that's right.
So you get through law school and you take the bar. You remember studying for the bar?
Yes, I remember thinking, and it was the Crosley bar exam, and it was very much in person. I understand it's not all in person, and now, but frankly, I felt like, oh my gosh, you go to law school so you can take this bar exam. I mean, the bar review course, and so I did that and took the bar in February 1982, and I started and interviewed in this very room, and I actually interviewed in November 1981 and started work March 1982.
With Hunter Smith and Davis?
With Hunter Smith and Davis.
What attracted you to Hunter Smith?
Well, I missed sort of that interview for a clerkship. Things are just different now. So and I think even then, most folks clerked with the idea that, they'd have that job, hopefully get that job the next year. And so when I interviewed with a firm, I was the only person that would be graduating from law school in a month. Everybody else was interviewing for a summer clerkship, I guess the summer of for the summer of 82. But I'd interviewed, the law school had wonderful on-campus interviews, and I traveled to Memphis and interviewed with a firm there, had an opportunity in Chattanooga. I believe that, I could have or would have received an offer from Arnett, Draper and Haygood. I just felt like overcoming that Miss Jimmie, Anyway, so this is one of the firms. The firm came on campus, and I was invited for a second interview. And I actually interviewed, I remember it because it was my birthday, and I stopped in Morristown to visit with my mother and sister for a little bit, and came, and it was an interesting process. You know, most firms that I interviewed with, you interview sort of one-on-one with a partner and travel around the office to have one-on-one interviews. And when I came here, I interviewed in this room with all the partners at the table. And unbeknownst to me, so I had not done my homework, but there were two lawyers in the firm who had a Morristown connection, if you will. One was Morris Haddon, and his his brother Joe was a dentist in Morristown. And so I had a lot of contact with his office because of the oral surgery office that I worked with. And so I had that connection. And then Bill Ray, who was a partner and a lawyer with this firm for many years, his first cousin and I were roommates at UT. So, you know, I really enjoyed the people that I met that day, and you were one of them. You were here with in my interview. Ed Norris was the managing partner at the time, and he spoke in superlatives. He spoke with certainty. He really gave a sales pitch that, you know, Hunter Smith and Davis, you could have a blue chip practice and live in a small town. And, you know, the firm, and like I said, we did this for years, even after I joined the firm and I was a partner for years, that same format. So you'd have this full interview, and then the associates would drive you down or around the city of Kingsport to see the sites, neighborhoods, that kind of thing. And then the firm went to Ridgefields for dinner that night. And I mean, I feel like the very same meal we had when I interviewed, we had perhaps for the next 25 years when we interviewed applicants. But it sold me, and I received a call quickly, and kind of measured the pros and cons of Memphis, Chattanooga versus Kingsport. Never been to Kingsport before that day, and it was closer to home. But it just felt like a good fit for me. And I'll add this. I think, you know, if you order life's the important decisions, give those priority. I mean, I think a decision to follow God's teachings probably ranks one. I think selecting your spouse is, you know, at the top of the list. And the next one, I think, is choosing where you're going to spend your time in an employment career situation. And I've been very fortunate to have made those three good decisions. Now, that doesn't mean I have made plenty of bad ones, but those three have worked out pretty well.
Were you the first woman at Hunter Smith?
So there was another female associate when I came, Jane Anderson. Well, she wasn't Jane Anderson at the time, but Jane Vestal was her name. And she and another later associate became romantically involved, and they left the firm to start their own practice. And so I was the second female hired. I'm very pleased to say that over the course of 40 years, the census of women in our firm has been as much or greater than a third. Sometimes we'd have several women hires in consecutive years, and so I think that women don't make up half of our firm, but not far from it. So,
what was your starting salary?
I made $21,000 a year.
Now, you've had other opportunities during the years to do other things. Why have you stayed at Hunter Smith?
I enjoy what I do. I enjoy the people I work with. I think I have, the firm has afforded me opportunities to do exactly what Ed Norris said would happen. I've had a very wide practice area, all focused on litigation, but lots of interesting cases. And I think there's a lot to be said for the autonomy of, being in a partnership. It's when I came with the firm, like I said, Ed Norris was the managing partner, and I think we all fondly think about him as a benevolent dictator. He made the decisions, and I think the senior partners were very generous to those that followed. I'd like to think that that's still the case now that I'm in that senior partner group, but I've never been unhappy here, and we can talk about the work a little bit more if you want to, but it has provided me, and I feel like this perhaps is less true than it used to be, but a good balance between, family and work. And I just, there are times that I certainly had opportunities to go other places, and when I considered all the factors, thought this was a good place for me to stay.
Now, who was your initial supervisor, and what type work were you doing?
When I came with the firm, and this is still true today, an associate is assigned to a supervisor, a partner, and I was assigned to Morris Haddon. And Morris, for anybody who might be watching this and not know him, has a lot of similar characteristics to Ed Norris. He was very generous, if you will, and I don't mean this sarcastic at all, generous in sharing his work responsibilities with me at an early age, or early tenure with the firm, and that afforded me sort of right off the bat opportunities to be in the courtroom, to argue motions, to participate in jury trials, and was pleased when his clients began to call me on their own, and he just encouraged that. And even today, he is, I can't tell you how long he's been with the firm. He's 82, and he is still very energetic and still has that optimistic and very positive view of things.
What areas of the law were you working in at that point in time?
So his practice, which became my practice, was a traditional insurance defense practice. A lot of auto tort cases, and he had a niche even when I began. If you'll let me, I'll tell you about my first day on the job, but where he represented insurance companies where people would burn their businesses or their homes to collect the insurance proceeds. And so I assisted him with those types of cases. And when I began as a lawyer, it was a good time in the sense that there were lots and lots of jury trials. I mean, there were 4 terms of court, and it was not unusual to try 2 or 3 cases in a term of court. There would be 3 or 4 terms per year. So we tried a lot of cases to a jury conclusion. But I don't know. Do you want to maybe take a short break, and then I'd be interested in telling you about my first day.
All right.
Okay. All right.
You mentioned that you had a lot of jury trials early on because there were a lot of jury trials when you first started practicing and for some time thereafter. Tell us about some of your experiences in those early jury trials.
So I was accused by attorney Nat Coleman, again now deceased. The first time I met him was at our office, and he said to me, "I just want you to know I'm a lawyer who believes women belong in the kitchen and the bedroom." And I thought, I certainly was not surprised that there were men in the early 80s who thought that, but I was surprised to hear someone be so brazen to say it. And by the time he retired, and he and I had several cases together. He did healthcare liability cases, as did I. And so certainly we had a change in our relationship. But he accused me of, in every jury trial, saying, "Oh, this is my first jury trial." And I said, "Well, Nat, I said that in Kingsport. This is my first jury trial in Kingsport. And yeah, I said it in Bristol. This is my first jury trial in Bristol, and in Johnson City, and Rogersville, and Greenville, and Claiborne County." So those were all true statements. He said, "Well, I'm just getting tired of hearing you say that in the cases against me." And I was like, anyway, so that was an interesting character. Then there's just kind of a difference in when we tried a case in Hancock County, Sneedville, which I think is the smallest county in the state of Tennessee. If not, it's close. Might be 95. I'm not sure. But so we had a jury trial. The courtroom was not air conditioned even then, and Judge Holt was our judge, William Holt. He smoked from the bench. Was not a big deal. And the trial went into the second day, and the judge comes to the bench, and he looks, I guess, at his jury roster, and he looks and looks, and finally he points out to a man there are 13 people in the box, the jury box, and he said, "Sir, I don't believe you were here yesterday." And the man speaks up and says, "No, I had to put up hay yesterday, but I'm glad to be here today." And the judge, in just a very respectful manner, he said, "Well, we're glad you're here too, but you're not going to be able to sit there. You need to sit back here in the back of the courtroom." So that was kind of, now that wouldn't happen. There's so much more formality. I can remember a federal judge in Knoxville, and in federal court, in the old federal court, not the building they're in now, but the judge was very much on a platform, and every once in a while you'd see him lean over, and his head would completely disappear from the camera. And I thought to myself, what is he doing? So finally we were at the bench arguing a motion then, and I saw he was spitting. He was chewing tobacco and spitting in a cup. And I was like, okay, well, mystery stop. Stop worrying about why it is he's disappearing out of sight every few minutes. But anyway, those things certainly are less common today than they used to be.
Did you enjoy picking juries?
I did. I mean, I think some of the traits that I learned from, whether it's Dorothy or Morris, but I try to be the nicest person in the courtroom. I try to find out some way to relate to the jury. And so yes, the case is not about the lawyer, but it doesn't help your client's case if you're able to develop a rapport or a trust with those that sit on the jury. And I can remember a case in federal court. We were local counsel, and it was an intellectual property case. And I was working with DC lawyers and who knew all about intellectual property. It was a patent infringement case. And they said, well, we want you to be involved in the case. And so we want you to pick the jury. And I was delighted to be of help. And they said, as a matter of fact, we want you to handle the damages aspect, which, was, the defendant had an economist. I had, the plaintiff had an economist. But anyway, so it just so happened in federal court in Greenville, they pulled from Hamlin County. And so I was able to use my Hamlin County to say, so I see your address is so-and-so. Is that near blah, blah, blah? And, anyway, a little bit of a connection. But what's interesting about that case is it was Judge Greer tried the case, and at the end of the proof, he determined that there was no issue of liability, and he granted a judgment or decided as a matter of law the issue of liability, and our client won. So the only issue for the jury to decide was the issue of damages. I had been the person who put on the damages expert. We finished, the case finished sooner, and we finished early Friday afternoon. The jury deliberated until 5 o'clock. And, we kept saying sort of traditional thinking, they come back, when it's time to go home. They did come back, and they said, we'd like to return on Monday. And, it involved a lot of money. I mean, the defendant said they owed fractions of a penny a square foot, and we, on the other hand, believed it to be much more than that. And that was the longest weekend. The litigation had preceded me, had been going on for a long time. The case was finally tried, and so we go back Monday, and it worked out fine. Our client was well pleased with the verdict, but I just remember kind of not being able to get that off my mind all weekend. Oh my gosh, what could they be talking about? But anyway, so.
A trial lawyer with 3 children, you must have had occasion to conduct jury trials when you were pregnant. Was that interesting?
It was interesting. A couple of those stick out in my mind. There is a former district attorney who had left public office and was in private practice in Hawkins County. And we tried a case, and I was about 8 months pregnant. Gained 50 pounds every time I was pregnant, so I, was good size. And the other lawyer, I made an objection. And I don't even remember how the judge ruled. But the case came out okay, good. And then the lawyer on the other side filed a motion based on my emotional outburst while, on the verge of giving birth. And I was so offended by that. We had a judge at the time who, tried to avoid as many decisions as possible. And, he actually said to me, have you and so-and-so kissed and made up yet? And I was like, no. No, we have not. But, it's that kind of thing. But yes, and other memories come to mind, but those I'll keep to myself about pregnancy and trial work.
You've mentioned the fact that you have started out with tort work and the arson work, and you mentioned intellectual property. Did you get into other areas of the law and try cases in, say, products liability?
Yes. So even from the start, in addition to working with Morris Haddon, I worked with Ed Treadway. And, the products liability cases that come to our firm, and I think the firm is very well situated. I tell people we're a big fish in a tiny pond, but there's a federal court that's 40 minutes away. And so we are frequently, that products cases tend to be pharmaceuticals, medical devices, dental, and other some industrial products that allegedly were defective, and hear my defense bent. But yes, then, IUDs back when I started, and those are great cases, to be honest with you. We did some work for Volkswagen and General Motors, and, I'd never been to New York City, and I went in the early, mid-'80s. I went to Chicago. It was very, provided a lot of opportunities that I might not otherwise have had. And really, our firm, again, because of where we're situated, we've worked with some pretty well-known national, international firms. I mean, name names, Jones Day, Skadden Arps, so it's been, it has really been, and I don't want to keep repeating this, but the blue chip, we've represented some significant, we have a little chemical Fortune 500 company located about a half a mile away from our office, and
that being,
I'm sorry?
That being
Eastman Chemical Company. And their global headquarters, like I said, are here in Kingsport. And, we've had the opportunity to do some work for them, intellectual property sometimes, contractual disputes, pretty weighty cases. And, they're very sophisticated users of legal services. But if we're talking about my practice, I will tell you that for many years, probably more than 25 and probably closer to 30, a large part of my time has been spent in the, used to call it medical malpractice. The statute now refers to it as healthcare liability actions. And I have enjoyed that work immensely. I enjoy getting to know my clients. I enjoy getting to know the medicine of the case, if you will. It has become a smaller, sort of the usual suspects of lawyers that file the cases and the usual suspects of lawyers that defend the cases. And it's, again, the client that insures most of the providers in Tennessee, I can candidly, genuinely say they're the best client I work for. They are sophisticated users, and they don't get too excited when you lose, and they don't get too upset, or either way. They don't get too excited when you win, they don't get too excited when you lose, and very supportive and great group of lawyers to work with.
How did you come to migrate into the healthcare liability practice?
Kind of being at the right place at the right time, I think. The firm had a partner one of 5 partners who have left our firm since I've been here in the last 40 years to go into the ministry. And that partner was sort of the primary contact for the hospital. And when he announced that he was leaving, it was determined that I would be that primary contact point, and the hospital was agreeable to it. And that relationship, frankly, blossomed and continues today. It's, that hospital became part of a larger system, and that system became even larger. And, Ballad Health is the single provider of hospital services almost from Greenville to Roanoke. So it's been a good relationship. And again, I was just fortunate to have worked with the departing Doug Tweed in some of the healthcare cases before he left. And, I guess good for lawyers, bad for the medical profession, but that area of practice has really grown a lot.
So did that pre-med curriculum that you took at UT and Walters State, does it serve you well now working in the healthcare liability area?
Yes. You and others in the firm, and I've said it myself, I have a Walmart medical degree. You learn something in a case, and over time, that information or knowledge serves you in future cases. And I will say that the staff and other folks come to me and they say, I have an appointment with, Dr. So-and-so. Do you know her? And, sometimes I can say, yeah, her kids play soccer with my grandkids or whatever, but that's not really what they want to know. They want to know, do I really know her professionally? And generally they're relieved when I say, no, I don't think I know her. So.
You have other areas that you've migrated into even beyond healthcare liability. You mentioned intellectual property. What are some of the other areas you are working in or have worked in over the years?
So, just other types of commercial litigation, contract disputes, again, sometimes involving, with very significant ramifications. And I don't always mean dollars. I mean, I distinctly remember a phone call where the client said, if this doesn't happen, it's going to, mean the jobs of lots of individuals. I've been involved in some civil rights litigation. You and I tried a case against East Tennessee. I won't say Northeast County, but we handled that matter. But it's typically been on the defense side, and I currently have some civil rights defense work that I'm doing. We get asked by counties sometimes when there are healthcare providers involved in the alleged violations of civil rights, constitutional rights, that kind of thing. And we've done some other work for federal law enforcement officers, agents.
So you've done some plaintiff's work as well?
I have. Yep.
In addition to what you do for a living every day, you have been involved in a number of activities, both in the community and in the law. Talk about your activities in the community and then your activities related to the practice of law.
So when I began with the firm, I think there was an expectation that you would become visible in the community. And, I had a stint in junior league. It was not a long-lasting stint, probably less than 5 years. Different things for different people. And but as my children went through school, obviously, by I guess they started school in 1990, there were, it's called the PTO as opposed to the PTA, but I was involved in their school programs, and then I have served on Girls Incorporated. I had been fairly active in my church. There are a lot of ministries for those in need through, I've been a member at First Baptist Church since 1982. And, I served on my time in the barrel as on the administrative committee at my church, periodically over the last 40 years, the same. I'm involved in the covenant counseling ministry at my church. But, in terms of the community, I've served in various United Way positions, and I guess that's how I would summarize that. I was fortunate, my husband and I, to have a nanny, and she became an integral part of our lives. She worked for us for almost 17 years, and she just passed away in the last few years, but she was my wife. I mean, she carpooled with my neighbors. She came to school programs. She made lunches for the children. She picked them up after school every day. When they began to be involved in activities, she drove them. She never made dinner, but for a while my kids wanted rice-a-roni for breakfast. Probably not the healthiest of meals, but she would be there in time to make their rice-a-roni. And Dorothy was her name, Dot. I mean, you knew Dot. She was well known in our community, and my friends that Dot carpooled with, they would say, "I love carpool." She said, "I know everything that's happening in your house." And I was like, "Well, just keep it to yourself." So, like I said, after Rebecca was about to graduate from high school, our youngest child was 12 or 13. And Dot began to have some health problems. And, she actually worked for our pediatrician, and they sort of grew out of the need for her, but she was wonderful, and I am very grateful. She loved my children. They could do no wrong, they always went to preschool a couple of mornings a week, but I remember the oldest one came home and she had just a perfect round bruise where she'd been bitten. And Dot was outraged. "What do they do down there? Do they not keep up with those kids? Blah, 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 blah." So fast forward about 6 years, and the youngest one comes home, and Dot reports to me that when she arrived at school, Molly, the youngest, was in timeout because she'd bitten a child. And at that point, Dot's frame of reference was, kids bite other kids, that's just what they do. I don't think they should have punished her for that. So she was that kind of person. And we, continued to stay in touch with her until she passed away. But a very large influence, I think all my children would say that. But I asked, sort of in preparation for this interview, I had a conversation with my oldest child, and I asked her sort of what her recollection was, her impression was. And she said, "Mom, you were there for all the big things." And, she's a good-hearted person. She may have just said that. She said it was always a big deal when you came, but you were there for all the things that mattered. When my children were younger, I was more in the habit of coming back to the office after they went to bed. And I work a lot. I always have. But to be honest with you, when I started with the firm, there was sort of an expectation that you would be there in the evenings. Not every evening, but so. And then now that they're gone and out of the house, it's it's just easier to stay and go home later, and so that's sort of become my work schedule, I guess.
You've been involved in a number of activities in the profession of law. Let's talk about that.
So, again, the firm encouraged it, and I am still a proponent that I get not just me, but the firm gets a fair number of referrals from lawyers across the state. And in addition to making friends and participating in whatever the continuing legal education or program offered, I really think it's important to be involved in bar organizations. I said, if they don't know who you are, if they don't know your name, they're not going to call and say, hey, I've got a friend who needs a lawyer in East Tennessee. So, so the firm encouraged that, and I was involved in the House of Delegates, the Tennessee Bar Association Board of Governors, and then I was asked he was on the Criminal Court of Appeals at the time, Joe Tipton, and he's retired now, but he asked me to serve on as an assistant examiner for the Board of Law Examiners, where I would write a question and then grade all of the papers for that one question. And sometimes we say yes because our ego gets the best of us. And I was flattered to be asked, but I did that, and I did that for a number of years. And honestly, while when I took the bar exam, wasn't terribly concerned that I wouldn't pass it. After I became an assistant examiner, I'd read those questions, twice a year and think to myself, oh my gosh, I'm glad I don't have to answer those questions. It's interesting, the longer you're a lawyer, sort of the less you know about the law generally, and your focus becomes more specific. But anyway, I did that for a while, and then I was asked to serve on the Board of Law Examiners, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. I did that for a dozen years. It was before the Supreme Court had enacted terms. But so I did that for a dozen years. The only part I didn't enjoy were the show cause hearings, where the character and fitness aspects. But I've got to know just wonderful lawyers across the state, Marlene Moses and Julian Bibb and Scott McGinnis, just great lawyers. And then after I finished my term or service on the Board of Law Examiners, then I was asked by the Supreme Court to serve on the Board of Professional Responsibility. And I was there for 6 years, and I served as chair, not the whole time, but, and, I think that Sandy Garrett and her staff do a great job. A lot of the cases were, sort of no-brainer cases, and then there were some, difficult decisions. But so I enjoyed that. When Governor Haslam was in office, he asked me to serve on the governor's commission for judicial selections, and that's when it was the trial lawyers and the appellate court. And then the legislature changed that, and then since Governor Lee asked, I've been serving on the committee for judicial nominees, and that's limited to the appellate and the Supreme Court. But again, it's been just a pleasure, and to be on those, serve in those roles. Again, I would mark as the number one thing the ability to get to know really fine people, good lawyers, smart people, and, to give back to a profession that has been extremely good for me and my family, for me personally. The BLE was, again, I found that somewhat of an intellectual challenge, and so that's
So with your perspective of being on the Board of Law Examiners and being a member of the BPR board, dealing with lawyer issues, and is the profession in a good place at this point?
I think that the vast majority of lawyers are ethical and do the right thing. I think that, unfortunately, I guess like every profession, sometimes you can have a few bad apples that tend to spoil the entire barrel. And, I think with social media, it just, I don't know, I'm grateful my children were not younger when social media, I'm not even sure Facebook existed until they were gone and in college. But I think, everything from what I consider to be fairly tasteless advertising. I just saw a firm advertisement in a magazine in Knoxville where every person depicted in the ad was holding a gun. Now, I guess that, I don't know. I'm just 1,000 yards from our office, there was a billboard where a lawyer advertised. And I can remember my middle child, my son was probably 8 or 10 years old, and he said, "Mom, why don't your firm, why doesn't your firm have a billboard?" And I said, I guess we prefer to have clients that don't decide which lawyer to use based on the billboards. But so I don't know. That's a lot of rambling to answer your question. I think it is still an honorable profession, and I think that the majority of lawyers are ethical and do the right thing. I think that, unfortunately, those that do not, everything is sort of known to everyone now, and so it's certainly not without its problems, and I don't really know what the fix is. I think, unfortunately, the Board of Professional Responsibility stays busy. There's no shortage of work, at least when I came off the board year before last. So.
Well, among the professional organizations and boards you've been on, and your community work and the practice of law, how difficult has all that juggling been with 3 kids and a husband and soccer and so on?
Well, I don't know. I think, I've been a lawyer 40 years now, and retirement certainly on the horizon. I do think the practice of law has become more difficult. I think that, you know, and whether it's being older or having, you know, you know, heavy responsibilities in that regard, but it's pretty I mean, I think being a lawyer is stressful, and I think, you know, I think it's unfortunate that. So your question was how difficult it was. My husband has been my rock, and I am very grateful for him. I couldn't have done it without him. You know, I am a person of faith, and I have certainly called on my faith to bring peace in lots of different situations. You know, I think being a lawyer has a similarity to being a physician in that you can do the very best you can do, but ultimately you don't control the outcome. And so I think that there is a degree of stress with that. You know, I think lawyers as a whole are, you know, sort of like to control things, and I admit that about myself. But you know, ultimately I don't get to control, particularly in a jury trial.
How has social media affected practice of law, for example, jury selection?
Well, I think that, you know, the social media and even the printed media, when there's a juicy story, they're really just interested in the sexy part of the story. And, you know, and it's not new, but it seems more prevalent. You know, I mentioned I've been involved in a civil rights case, and when the case is all over, I plan to speak to the TBA today about printing what I believe to be only one side of the story, and there's, you know, there's a whole lot more. It's kind of like sometimes you know, will be involved in a matter at the hospital on the front end, and then later on I'll read about a lawsuit that's been filed, and I'm like, okay, I know this is the same case, but boy, is this a different story than as it was happening in real time. So I think printed or social media, you know, Tennessee's had some members of the judiciary that have been in trouble, you know, relative to their use of social media. You know, I think that I think it's just generally I don't think you can change people's opinions politically with social media. I personally don't think that. And I think that there's a lot of lawyers, and maybe they don't publish social media themselves, but, you know, they have people who do, and I just think that I think it's an issue that the judiciary ought to be taking a strong look at.
Has legislation affected the manner in which you practice law today?
You know, when I started with the firm, Mr. Treadway kept referring to the new rules, and you know, after a week, I asked someone what new rules he was referring to because I was afraid I was missing something. And it was the Tennessee Rules of Civil Procedure. So, while those have been around a while, I would say my practice was affected by the change in the healthcare legislation. And certainly there were a lot more lawsuits, malpractice cases filed before 2008 and even 2011. And the legislature put in place some pre-suit requirements. And so before that time, lawyers looked like heroes to their clients because we got a lot of those cases dismissed pretty early on because they shouldn't have been filed in the first place. And then after lawyers got the notice rights, now when you get a malpractice case, at least a physician somewhere believes that there's a basis for it. So that was pretty significant. Tort reform, the Civil Justice Act, put in place the caps for non-economic damages. That's been significant. I even hate to say this, but comparative fault came into being. That it used to be strictly contributory negligence, and so comparative fault. So there've been a lot of changes, and I think whether I appreciated it at the beginning, they were good changes.
Did you ever want to be a judge?
I did. I was contacted, and I guess this is as good a place to say, I feel like there have been opportunities afforded me because I am a woman. When George W. Bush was president, I was contacted by some folks in Nashville who said, would you be interested in being a federal judge? And, I thought about it and said, sure. And ultimately interviewed with, at the time, Attorney General Alberto Gonzales. And the senator in place at the time said, I have to nominate 3, but you're my pick. And so on Monday after the Judge Greer got the job, Magistrate Inman and we literally were sitting in the West Wing and had interviews 30 minutes apart, and we were all, well acquainted and friends. And so Monday afternoon, I got a call from the White House that said, we met with the president this morning, and he's going to say my name, and he said Ronnie Greer's name. So it was a disappointment. I thought, gee, was it something I said? But, I believe that things sort of work out the way they're supposed to. And, I tell my kids they wouldn't have finished their various degrees without debt had I become a federal judge, probably. So there were benefits in not being in. And I applied once for the Eastern Section Court of Appeals. Again, I'm a people person, and I think probably not getting that position also worked out the way it should have.
You've mentored a number of associates and young partners. What advice have you given them that you feel assisted them the most in their development?
Well, that might be a better question to ask them than me in terms of assisting in their development. I have tried to instill in them the importance of being a person who is known as, once they give their word, it matters. And, to be principled. I still generally say it's hard to be a great lawyer between the hours of 8 and 5. That, things have changed. Priorities, I think, have changed with, the longer I've been here in terms of life-work balance, and I get that. I try to encourage lawyers to be curious about the law. Sometimes I'm asked a question and I could give the answer, but again, circumstances dictate if this is the route. But I think when you learn the answer on your own, it tends to stay with you, and you learn it as opposed to simply being told. So I have encouraged lawyers to maintain sort of a curiosity about the law.
Let's take a break.
Okay.
We've had so many changes in technology. How have those changes impacted the way you practice law?
Well, I think that certainly less paper. When I came to the firm in 1982, I was instructed to learn to dictate. It was sort of a requirement, and I did. And I had a legal assistant who, for a while, worked solely for me. I now share a legal assistant with some days 3 lawyers, but a lot of times recently 4 lawyers. And that could not be possible but for technology. I used to type papers in college for extra money, term papers and things, reports, and so keyboarding was nothing new for me. But all the pleadings, for in large part, all of those, come in electronically. Everything is saved on the system. There are times that I will say to myself, well, I'm looking for something on the system, and they're organized like a paper file would be, but I'm like, oh my gosh, it might be just quicker, let me look. And there are certain things but the technology has made a tremendous difference in the practice of law. I think for the younger lawyers, and by younger I might say those in the last dozen years, they come and, and even for me, dictation's a thing of the past. Now it's easier, you can type quicker than you can write, and I think, certainly in the 2 years of COVID, Zoom depositions have been great. We've been able to continue with the practice of law because of Zoom depositions. And I personally think that, for experts, in the healthcare liability cases, experts just have to be licensed in Tennessee or a contiguous state. So I think that we'll continue to use Zoom depositions in the taking of experts, and I think that other lawyers, I think it's become a very accepted practice, perhaps initially by necessity, but now I think that it makes a lot of sense.
In your 40 years at Hunter Smith, have you become involved in the firm administration?
I have. Like I said, when I began with the firm, and for several years after that, we had a benevolent dictator, Ed Norris, and it worked wonderfully. I became a partner. I came here in '82 and became a partner in May of '86. And the day that I started with the firm, Bill Argabright, who had practiced 5 years in Nashville, he and Steve Kramer and I all started the same day. And I think that Steve certainly had his benefactor. I had mine, and things, there were changes within the firm. And so, but yes, I have served as managing partner. It is, I was pleased to lead in that role. It was not a role that I wanted to stay in. Sometimes, I don't know if you've heard the saying, we don't have a lack of leadership. We, over the years, have sometimes had a lack of anyone willing to be led. And, our firm, like others, is not without some strong personalities, but it's been a wonderful place to be. And I think that there are high expectations, and I think that it's, the firm is 107 years or 6 years old. It's pretty remarkable. So,
you talked about picking juries in various places. Are there differences in picking juries or trying cases depending on the county you happen to be in?
I think not so much. I mean, I think it's good to know the community you're in. I spend a fair amount of time in Anderson County, coincidentally, and I think that it makes sense to learn how the locals pronounce the community, so that you can always, went through a whole trial in Elizabethan, where every time the lawyer, who was not from around here, called it Elizabethtown. And there was a lawyer he was from Knoxville, and he referred to Bloomingdale Way. Well, for people that live in Kingsport, it's Bloomingdale Pike. And so I think it's important to know your community, but, in terms of the information that you might seek, and I don't know, I just have found to, try to be myself, not be somebody I'm not, and I think it's more important to be familiar with the community you're in, as opposed to try to change yourself for that. I guess is how I'd answer that question.
Having been a member of the Board of Law Examiners and the BPR, do you find that the powers that be, who make appointments and so on, appreciate the difficulty of travel to Middle Tennessee for meetings and other functions?
Well, so having lived in East Tennessee my entire adult life, I think that there's a strong sentiment for people that live in East Tennessee to believe that the state stops in Knoxville, and it doesn't. Our office is 100 miles from downtown Knoxville, and East Tennessee continues another 60 miles in some directions east of us. So I have been pleased to be a representative from Northeast Tennessee, but it is a drive. When I was younger, I would sometimes drive to Nashville for a meeting and drive back the same day. Frankly, I physically am just, can't do that anymore. So there is the travel. Sometimes, and it's okay going because we gain an hour. Most of the meetings that I've attended are in Nashville, but when the bar meets in Memphis, you can drive like a maniac from Kingsport, Tennessee, and Memphis. You cannot get to Memphis. I have a daughter that lives there. I'd never driven there till she moved there, but it is a 7.5-hour drive if you don't stop a single time and break all speed limits. So, when the Bar Association has a meeting in Memphis, it is. I would suspect that the participation, particularly east of Knoxville, is much less, and I'm sure the reverse is true. So it is a commitment to be involved in things, but I would hope that the Supreme Court and, the powers that are involved in decision making continue to involve the people in Northeast Tennessee. There's some fine lawyers in Northeast Tennessee. Some of the best lawyers I deal with are here in the Tri-Cities, so Greenville. And so.
Well, we've talked about how you've juggled your schedule and juggled your life. Do you have time for hobbies or recreation?
So I'm not really an athletic person. I mean, I look like I might be athletic, but I'm not. My husband says it's the whole eye-hand coordination, and I'm not an athletic person. But one of the things I love about where I live is the friends that I've made. So I play mindless bunco with a group of intelligent women, smart and just good people. So I do that once a month. I am in a book club. And in both of these groups, the book club has met probably 15 years now. And, it causes me to read books that I might not otherwise select. I'm in a birthday lunch group, and we celebrate and we share, the good and the bad with one another. I'm in a supper club, and Bill and Nancy, you and your wife, happen to be in that supper club. And we started meeting, and we've traveled some, that supper club, before my last child was born, and she's 31. And so, I'm in a women's Sunday school class that I tell people it's some widows, some women that are divorced, and some women, and I fall in the latter category, whose husbands don't really like Sunday school. So that group has been meeting close to 10 years now, and so I in terms of exercise, I do yoga twice a week. It's a bit of a geriatrics yoga class. The teacher comes here. This began in COVID, and so she comes twice a week. We meet on Wednesdays and Sundays, and there's an 80-year-old in our firm. There's a 70-year-old who's a lawyer but not a member of our firm, and then I'm 60-something. So I do that twice a week. My husband is a fitness person, and we ride bikes. I now have an e-bike, so that hardly feels like I can count that as exercise. But so I love to read. On the list of things, what are you going to do when you retire? I'm gonna set a goal of reading more. I read a book a month, but there's a lot of junk I'd like to read or used to read. Don't seem to have the time now, but I don't know what my husband and I are going to do about this travel issue. He said he agrees with his neighbor who said, everybody says travel or retire and travel. He said, I want to retire and stay home. So we might pass each other. I don't know. I think I want to travel. So I don't know if that answers your question.
What's the best book you've read recently?
What's the best book I've read recently? It's not. I finished The Lincoln Highway, and it's a great story of showing the various sides of one's character. So it's a good book. I read, I'd never read it before, Forever Amber, which was almost 1,000 pages, and apparently was sort of the European setting of Gone with the Wind. It was written in the 40s. I didn't love it, but, you know, kind of started it, so I finished it. But anyway, we're reading, my book club, we're reading The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell this month. And so it's a good story. I don't haven't read enough to talk about it, but so. Is
there some achievement you have that you're most proud of?
Yes, there is. In 2009, I was inducted into the American College of Trial Lawyers, and I'd been a member of ABOTA and you know, some other organizations. But after I learned about the vetting process, I was very much honored, because it is a significant vetting, and then you're voted on by the peers in your state, and yada, yada, yada. So, so that was in 2009. I went on to serve as the chair for the Tennessee committee. And, you know, it has good programs, it does good things, but to be selected among your peers, and they have great trips. You know, the year that I was inducted, that same year, Randy Wilson from Miller Martin and Bob Boston from Waller, my classmates, we all traveled with our spouses to Puerto Rico and had a great time.
Is there anything else you wish I had asked and you wish, or that you wish to tell us?
Well, I guess the other thing I would say is my other accomplishment. I am very proud of my children. They have good hearts. They care about people. So I'm very proud of them.
That's a wrap.